Nayana Verghese was the quiet wife everyone admired. Arvind Verghese was the respected banker. No one expected to vanish, but when Inspector Jithan Rao began asking questions, a chilling truth surfaced. Beneath the polished floor tiles of their Alappuzha home lay the body of a husband, hidden by the woman who swore to love him. What looked like a perfect family was about to become one of India's most disturbing true crime stories. Nayana Verghese had always been seen as the woman who lived a quiet and disciplined life. In the town of Alappuzha, people often spoke of her poise, her soft smile, and the way she carried herself with dignity even though her husband, Arvind, was known for his temper. To the outside world, their marriage appeared calm, even enviable. Neighbors admired the way Nayana kept her home tidy and how she and Arvind often walked to church together on Sundays. But the reality inside the Verghese household was far different from the picture others believed. Behind the closed doors of their modest home, tension hung heavy like an invisible cloud. Arvind, once a charming man who worked diligently at the bank, had grown bitter with time. His frustrations over money, his fading authority at work, and his constant dependence on alcohol had made him unpredictable. Nayana bore the brunt of this change. She had learned the art of silence, letting Arvind's words cut into her without showing the world what it cost her. Over the years, small arguments had turned into storms that left her in tears long after Arvind had stormed out or passed out on the sofa. Friends rarely visited because Arvind did not like outsiders intruding into his space. He had grown controlling, questioning Nayana's every move, from how much salt she put in his food to the way she folded his shirts. Life for her was a cycle of waiting, waiting for his moods to pass, waiting for him to sleep, waiting for morning to come when she could breathe again, for a few hours. Yet even in this storm of a marriage, Nayana never imagined herself capable of what would eventually happen. She held on to a sense of duty, believing it was her responsibility as a wife to endure. In the quiet corners of her heart, she wished for peace, but never truly thought of escape. That illusion shattered one late evening, when the air inside the Verghese home turned darker than ever before. Arvind returned home after a long night of drinking. His shirt was stained, his voice louder than usual, and his anger searching for a target. What began as muttered complaints about his dinner quickly escalated into accusations, then shouting, and then violence. For Nayana, it was not the first time he had raised his hand, but that night something in her snapped. The weight of years of humiliation and the raw fear of his aggression merged into a single moment of desperate instinct. Arvind lunged forward, threatening, his face twisted in rage. On the kitchen counter lay a heavy marble pestle used for grinding spices. Nayana's hand moved without thought, gripping it with every ounce of strength her trembling body could muster. The strike landed before she even realized what she had done. Arvind staggered, his eyes wide with shock, and then collapsed to the floor. The silence that followed was unlike anything Nayana had ever experienced. It was heavy, suffocating, absolute. She dropped the pestle, her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Arvind lay motionless, his head at an odd angle, his body still. She waited for him to groan, to shout again, to rise in fury, but nothing came. The reality of what she had done began to creep into her mind, cold and unforgiving. She knelt beside him, whispering his name, shaking his shoulder. But the truth was clear. Arvind was gone. For a moment, she was frozen, staring at the man who had been both her partner and her tormentor. A flood of emotions surged through her: fear, guilt, relief, disbelief. The very walls of her house seemed to close in, bearing witness to the crime she had committed. Her heart raced as she thought of what the neighbors might hear, what the police might say, what her life would become once the world discovered the secret, now lying on her kitchen floor. Nayana pressed her hands to her face, her mind unraveling. She wanted to scream, but swallowed the sound, terrified it might carry outside. In that suffocating silence, one thought began to crystallize in her mind. She could not let anyone know what had happened. She could not let her life be destroyed by a single moment of desperation. The body on the floor was no longer just her husband. It was evidence. It was danger. It was the weight of everything she wanted to hide. As the minutes stretched into hours, the fear inside her gave way to cold calculation. She began to think of ways to erase what she had done, to cover the traces before anyone could suspect. The night that had begun with rage had ended in death, and as she sat in the dim light of her kitchen, Nayana understood one thing clearly. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. Now her survival depended on how well she could bury her secret. Nayana sat in the corner of her dimly lit living room, her hands still trembling from what she had done. The image of Arvin's lifeless body on the kitchen floor burned into her eyes, refusing to fade even when she closed them. Panic clawed at her chest, yet somewhere in the chaos of her thoughts, a memory returned. Years earlier she had watched a film that lingered in her mind, far longer than others, Drishyam. The story of a man who buried a body beneath the floor of a building had fascinated her then as fiction. But now, in her desperation, it became something more than a movie. It became a blueprint. She knew she could not simply drag Arvin's body into the backyard or dump him in a river. The town was too small, the neighbors too curious, the police too quick to ask questions. If she wanted to survive, the answer had to lie within her own walls. The very house that had been her prison could become her shield. She spent the night pacing, stopping only to stare at Arvin's body still lying cold on the kitchen tile. The thought of leaving him there until morning filled her with dread, but she was too terrified to move him alone in the dark. Instead, she covered the body with a thick plastic sheet she found in the storeroom, weighing it down with a basket of rice. She barely slept, every sound outside the house making her flinch, every dog bark convincing her someone had seen inside. When dawn broke, she looked like a ghost in her own mirror, her face pale, her eyes hollow. By morning she had a plan. She would not bury the body outside. She would not risk dragging it through the neighborhood where someone might notice. She would entomb him under her feet, hidden where no one would think to look. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help to move the tiles and lay them again without raising suspicion. That was when she thought of Rahul Sen, a young mason who lived a few lanes away. He was hardworking, discreet, and always eager to earn. She told herself he would never guess the truth if she disguised it as a renovation job. That afternoon, she walked through the market with careful steps, rehearsing the words she would use. She told Rahul she wanted her kitchen floor retiled. She pretended it was a sudden decision, blaming the old floor for cracks and stains. Rahul, unsuspecting, agreed quick. He promised to bring his tools the next day, grateful for the work. As he spoke, Nayana's heart pounded with both relief and terror. She had set her plan in motion. When she returned home, the weight of what she was about to do settled on her again. She dragged Arvin's body closer to the corner of the kitchen where the tiles would be replaced. Each movement of the heavy bundle left her shaking and breathless, but determination pushed her forward. She cleaned the bloodstains from the floor with obsessive care, scrubbing until the tiles gleamed. By the time Rahul arrived the next morning, the kitchen appeared ordinary, though the smell of disinfectant lingered faintly in the air. Rahul set to work with cheerful energy, breaking the old tiles and lifting the cement. He chatted casually about village gossip and rising material costs, never noticing the fear etched into Nayana's face. She pretended to be busy in another room, listening to the strikes of his hammer echo through the house. Each sound reminded her of what lay hidden, just a few feet away, waiting for its final grave. When the moment came, she waited until Rahul stepped outside to fetch water before she acted. With trembling hands, she unwrapped the sheet and dragged Arvin's body into the pit left behind by the removed tiles. Her heart thundered as she arranged him carefully, curling the body to fit within the space. She covered him again quickly before Rahul returned, throwing sacks of cement and bricks over the bundle to mask the shape. Rahul came back without suspicion, mixing fresh cement and sealing the floor with neat precision. By the end of the day, the new tiles gleamed, smooth and spotless, hiding the darkest secret of her life beneath them. As the mason packed his tools, he smiled, asking for his payment. Nayana handed him the money with shaking fingers, her lips pressed tightly together to stop them from quivering. When he left, she locked the door behind him and collapsed onto the new floor. She pressed her hands against the cool tiles, feeling the solid barrier between her and the man she had once loved and feared. In that moment, she allowed herself to believe she had succeeded. The plan inspired by a film had saved her. Beneath those polished tiles lay not just a body, but the secret of her survival. She whispered to herself that no one would ever know, that her husband's disappearance would be a mystery without an answer. Yet deep inside, buried as carefully as the body itself, a small voice warned her that nothing stays hidden forever. Days slipped into weeks, and the once lively presence of Arvind Verghese faded from the rhythms of a lap. His absence was first brushed aside by neighbors, who assumed he had gone on a business trip. After all, Arvind was known to travel occasionally for work at the bank. But soon, whispers began to circulate. People noticed the silence of his usually sharp footsteps on the street, the missing figure at the tea stall where he often paused in the evenings, and the empty chair at the church where he sat every Sunday. For a man as regular in his habits as Arvind, disappearance without a word felt unnatural. The town's gossip grew louder, and eventually concern spread to his workplace. At the bank, his colleagues wondered why he had not returned from what Nayana claimed was a trip to Chennai. She kept her story consistent, telling them he had urgent training sessions and would be back after a few weeks. She even went as far as sending text messages from his phone, writing in a clipped style to mimic his usual tone. The messages spoke of long meetings, tiring days, and busy schedules. For a while, this explanation seemed to pacify those who asked questions. But suspicion lingers where truth is absent, and soon people began to question why there were no official records of Arvind's supposed travel. No train tickets, no flight bookings, no receipt. His bank manager noticed his absence had stretched far too long without any documentation, and unease turned into official action. It was not long before a missing persons report was filed. The responsibility for the case fell into the hands of Inspector Jithan Rao, a man with sharp instincts and little patience for half-truths. Known for his persistence, he rarely let mysteries remain unsolved. To him, every disappearance left behind a trail. It was only a matter of finding where it began. When he received the complaint, he immediately sensed something unusual. Men like Arvind, tied to their work and their reputation, did not simply vanish without leaving a trace. Rao began his investigation by questioning the neighbors, colleagues, and anyone connected to the Verghese family. The stories he heard made him pause. Neighbors recalled hearing loud arguments between Nayana and Arvind shortly before his disappearance. They remembered how the lights in the Verghese home had burned late into the night on the day he was last seen. Some even admitted they had noticed a strange quietness afterward, as if something had been abruptly cut off. To Rao, these fragments painted a picture of tension. When he questioned Nayana, her calm demeanor struck him as unusual. She spoke with rehearsed composure, repeating the same story about Arvind's trip. But Rao's years on the force had taught him that silence often carried the loudest confession. He noticed the stiffness in her posture, the way her eyes darted whenever he asked about her husband's habits, and how she avoided direct details about his supposed travel. Meanwhile, Nayana worked tirelessly to maintain her mat. She kept the house in order, dressed neatly, and continued with her daily routines as if nothing had changed. To outsiders, she appeared to be a woman waiting patiently for her husband's return. But inside, every knock at the door made her stomach clench. Every passing police jeep made her heart race. The tiles beneath her feet were both her shield and her curse, for they carried the weight of her darkest truth. She convinced herself the cover was strong, that no one would think to look under a freshly laid floor. But as Inspector Rao's visits grew more frequent, her confidence began to waver. Rao requested access to Arvind's phone records and financial activity. What he found disturbed him. There were no transactions, no calls, no signs of life after the night neighbors reported hearing an argument. To Rao, the evidence pointed to one grim possibility. Arvind had not left town at all. He had vanished within his own home. The investigation slowly tightened its grip around Nayana. Friends who once believed her story began to doubt her. Whispers of suspicion followed her when she stepped out to buy vegetables or light candles in the church. Every move she made was watched. Every word weighed. What frightened her most was not the neighbor's judgment, but the quiet persistence of Inspector Rao. He returned again and again, his eyes scanning every corner of her home, his questions circling closer to the truth. Despite her carefully constructed lies, the cracks were beginning to show. Rao had learned about the sudden kitchen renovation, an odd choice for a woman whose husband was supposedly away. Why retail a floor that had been in good condition? Why spend money on such a project when her husband's absence should have demanded caution? These questions turned the simple story into a tangled web. Nayana knew that no matter how well she had hidden the body, the danger was no longer about cement and tiles. It was about the instincts of a man determined to find the truth. And with each passing day, her confidence that the secret would remain buried grew weaker. Inspector Jithan Rao had seen many strange cases in his years of service, but something about the disappearance of Arvind Verghese gnawed at him in ways others didn't. He replayed every statement he had taken, every observation he had made, and one detail stuck out stronger than the rest: the sudden renovation of the kitchen floor. In small towns like Alappuzha, people did not spend money on unnecessary repairs without good reason. It was not just unusual, it was suspicious. When he pressed Nayana about it, she claimed the tiles were cracked and loose, but her answer felt hollow, rehearsed. Rao marked it in his notes, determined to dig deeper. Nayana, on the other hand, was beginning to unravel. Though she tried to carry on with daily routines, her nerves betrayed her. She moved around the house as if every corner held eyes watching her. The kitchen, once her place of comfort, had become her greatest fear. She avoided lingering there, stepping on the tiles too lightly, as if afraid they might betray her with a sound. Every time Rao visited, her palms grew damp, her voice stiff. She answered his questions carefully, but in her effort to sound normal, she often ended up sounding defensive. Rao noticed it all, filing away her unease, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to fit together. The inspector returned often, sometimes unannounced, testing her reactions. On one visit, he casually leaned against the kitchen counter and let his eyes scan the floor. His years of experience told him that truth often revealed itself, not in grand gestures, but in small details. The tiles were newer than the rest of the house, their shine slightly mismatched with the worn surfaces around. The faint scent of cement still lingered, as though the work had been done recently. He asked Nayana why she had not mentioned the renovation when he first visited. Her explanation was simple. She claimed she wanted to improve the house while her husband was away. But Rao found it curious that she had chosen the very days following Arvind's disappearance to carry out such work. Meanwhile, Nayana's guilt began seeping into her life in subtle but dangerous ways. Sleep eluded her, and when it came, it brought nightmares. She often woke in the middle of the night, imagining she heard faint thuds beneath the floor, as though Arvind's body was trying to claw its way back to the surface. Her appetite dwindled. Her once steady hands now shook even when she poured a glass of water. Friends who visited noticed the hollowness in her eyes, the way her smile never quite reached her lips anymore. Some whispered she was grieving silently. Others wondered if she knew more than she was letting on. Inspector Rao, unwilling to rely on instinct alone, began piecing together evidence. He spoke to Rahul Sen, the mason who had carried out the tiling work. Rahul explained he had been hired suddenly, with little warning, to retile the kitchen. He found it odd but assumed Nayana simply wanted improvement. When pressed, he admitted the old tiles had been in good condition and did not need replacement. That admission fueled Rao's suspicion further. Why hide a floor that did not need fixing, unless there was something beneath it worth concealing? Rao's interest in the kitchen grew obsessive. He began considering ways to justify a search warrant, but he knew he needed stronger grounds. He monitored Nayana's movements, checked Arvind's financial records again, and even sent officers to Chennai to verify her story. Each effort came back empty. There was no sign of Arvind leaving Alappuzha, no records of his travel, no witnesses who had seen him elsewhere. To Rao, the conclusion was tightening into one chilling possibility: Arvind had never left the house alive. For Nayana, every day became a battle against discovery. She rehearsed her lies endlessly, telling herself the story until it sounded real, even in her own ears. Yet her body betrayed her with every encounter. The inspector's piercing eyes unsettled her, and she could not stand the silence when he lingered in her home. More than once, she considered fleeing, but she knew running would confirm her guilt. Instead, she clung desperately to the hope that the cement and tiles would remain her shield. But small cracks were already forming, not in the cement, but in her composure. Once, when Rao visited, he casually tapped the floor with his shoe. The hollow sound that echoed faintly made her stomach twist. He did not say anything then, but the look in his eyes told her he had noticed. Her world was crumbling, not because the floor was weak, but because the truth was no longer just buried in the kitchen. It was written across her face for a sharp-eyed investigator to read. The more she tried to hide, the closer Rao seemed to move toward the truth. The floor beneath her feet was becoming less of a hiding place, and more of a trap. What had once felt like the perfect solution was now beginning to look like the very thing that would betray her. And deep down, in the silence of her guilt-ridden nights, Nayana knew that the inspector's persistence would eventually bring the truth to light. The day began like any other, the air heavy with the sticky humidity of Kerala's monsoon season. Yet inside Nayana Verghese's home, the tension was thicker than the weather outside. Inspector Jithan Rao arrived with his team, this time carrying an air of finality that unsettled her. She had grown used to his visits, his questions and his silent examinations of her house, but something about his calm determination that day made her blood run cold. He no longer seemed to be searching for clues. He looked like a man ready to confirm what he already knew. Rao explained that he had received clearance to carry out a detailed forensic search of the Verghese property. His words made Nayana's heart race, though she forced herself to nod with a mask of reluctant agreement. She wanted to appear cooperative, but her body betrayed her with every twitch of her fingers, every uneven breath she took. The officers spread out, inspecting the rooms one by one, but Rao's steps led him directly to the kitchen, as though drawn there by instinct. The workers began with surface-level checks, tapping the walls and corners for inconsistencies. Rao, however, focused on the floor. He crouched down, his eyes scanning the tiles carefully, noting the faint mismatches between them and the older parts of the house. He instructed his team to take measurements and samples. Nayana stood nearby, frozen in place, her stomach twisting violently. Every strike of their tools against the tiles echoed in her ears like a death knell. When the first hammer fell against the floor, the sound made her knees weak. The tiles cracked, dust rising in the air, and the once pristine surface began to splinter. She clenched her fists, praying the cement would hold, that the body beneath would remain concealed. But Rao's persistence was merciless. The men worked systematically, removing each section with precision. The air grew thick with cement dust, filling the kitchen with a gray haze. Beneath the noise another sound emerged, an unmistakable stench creeping upward, faint at first, but quickly spreading through the house. One of the officers paused, his expression tightened. He knew the smell well. It was the stench of death. Nayana saw it in their faces before anyone spoke. The suspicion had transformed into certainty. The hammer struck again, and this time the sound was different, hollow and dull. The workers stopped, their eyes turning to Rao. He gave a silent nod, and they continued. Within minutes the truth surfaced. Beneath the broken tiles, wrapped tightly in decaying plastic, lay the remains of Arvind Verghese. The room fell into silence, broken only by the buzzing of flies that had been trapped beneath the cement. The stench was overwhelming now, forcing some officers to step back. For a long moment, no one spoke, as if giving the dead man his grim acknowledgement. Then Rao straightened, his gaze locking on Nayana. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide and empty, her body trembling so violently, she had to grip the counter for support. She did not scream, she did not run, she simply collapsed into a chair, staring blankly at the broken floor that had once been her shield. The secret she had guarded so fiercely was now laid bare for all to see. The perfect plan she had built, inspired by a movie and carried out with such care, had betrayed her in the end. The very floor she had trusted to hide her crime had become the evidence that sealed her fate.
For Inspector Rao, the discovery was grim but satisfying. His instincts had been correct from the beginning. Every doubt, every suspicion, had led to this moment. He ordered the remains to be carefully removed and documented. The officers moved with solemn efficiency, lifting the decomposed body out of its cement tomb. The sight of Arvind's remains silenced the whispers that had long haunted the town. The missing man was no longer missing. He had been underfoot all along. News spread quickly. Neighbors gathered outside the Verghese home, shocked and horrified. The story of a devoted wife waiting for her husband had been torn apart, replaced by the truth of a woman who had killed and buried him beneath her own floor. Some whispered that she had been driven by years of abuse. Others saw only the crime, and nothing of the suffering behind it. The town buzzed with speculation, but none of it mattered now. The evidence was undeniable. As Nayana was led out of her home in handcuffs, she did not resist. She walked silently, her eyes lowered, her steps heavy. The neighbors watched as the woman they once admired for her grace was taken away as a murderer. She felt the weight of every stare, every whisper, but above all, she felt the crushing silence of the truth finally unearthed. The house she had once dreamed would protect her had instead become her undoing. Inspector Rao watched her being driven away, his expression stern, but thoughtful. Justice had been served, yet he knew that behind every crime lay layers of human pain and choices gone wrong. For Nayana, the story ended not with freedom, but with the cold walls of a prison. For Arvind, it ended in a shallow grave beneath his own home. And for the town of Alappuzha, it became a chilling reminder that secrets buried in silence have a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep the cement is.